Hello and welcome to Pluribus Unum's Fireside Chats. Not as good as FDR's, but hey, it's something. Now, this episode, as you can tell by the title, is going to be an interesting one. I expect this one to have a decent amount of views. Maybe some controversy in the comment section, especially considering how I'm going to intend to tag all the stuff in this to make sure that this episode gets noticed. And be warned, in this episode, I'm going to have to talk about a lot of things. And not all of them are going to be that well liked. Before we get into that, let's get into the smaller creator shoutouts. This is one that my audience is probably going to be a bit more familiar with. ERIN Green TV. For those who don't know who ERIN Green is and why she's relevant to this channel, she actually helped me make a video, kind of. Basically, I asked her to watch the movie Glenn or Glenda to see how she felt about it, especially given the fact that I was making a video about it, and I was going to claim that it was the most pro-trans film of the 50s, and I wanted to get an actual trans person to be like, hey, is this actually that? I didn't tell her that was my perspective prior to watching it, but I basically just said, hey, can you watch this? And she's like, sure. She ended up posting a video about it on her own channel. Basically, her full-fledged reaction, which is legal because that movie is like from the 50s, and everybody in it is long dead, I think. And then I put her on the Friends of the Show tab on this channel because, you know, I just felt like it. But what kind of content does ERIN Green do? Well, she mostly streams on Twitch and then posts some of the VODs on her YouTube channel, and her main focus is trans-related content. You know, trans news, trans discussions, that kind of stuff. Building up trans dialogue, I guess. Her primary show is called Trans in the AM, where she goes over some news and regarding trans stuff. She also does one, like, a sub-series called Friendly Friday, where she shouts out and has, like, interviews with other trans creators. And she actually borrowed an idea that I suggested, where she was interested in having some allies on the show, so then I suggested, hey, you can do that and call it, like, Ally Afternoon. And she basically took that idea and went with it in her own direction. If that stuff is your thing, then by all means, support her on Twitch, support her on YouTube. Technically, she shouldn't even be on here because her Twitch channel is bigger than me, but she has, like, 779 followers on Twitch. But her YouTube account has significantly less subscribers than me. So yeah, if you want to support trans creators and be a trans ally, by all means support all of her stuff through the description below. Now with that out of the way, let's get right into the news. First, again, foreign news. First, we're going to be talking about the French election. You know, just basically wrap up the French election saga. The French election just wrapped up, and lo and behold, Macron ended up winning. And it seems that a lot of the praise has been put on Mélenchon supporters, who actually voted for Macron in numbers that I didn't expect. I believe the last numbers that I saw had 42% of Mélenchon voters vote for Macron. Although I think around 24% voted for Le Pen. I think a similar number to the ones that voted for Macron also abstained. I don't have the exact numbers with me. The one number I do have with me is the fact that there were 28% of people who didn't bother voting. There are actually some charts around this election that show how Mélenchon voters went, because a lot of people were saying, like, Mélenchon voters were essentially the kingmakers in this election. And it shows two large voting blocks, because it's like one of those charts where it has, like, the rectangles representing the candidates' votes in the first round, and then it shows like lines of, like, varying sizes into how they voted in the second round. And it shows two large chunks from Mélenchon's voting base went from Mélenchon to Macron and then Mélenchon to abstain. But then there was, like, this significantly smaller line that was from Mélenchon to Le Pen. We had similar numbers in regards to basically all the other candidates, like the Greens. A lot of them went to Macron, some abstained, some went to, like, very few went to Le Pen. And Zemmour, it's like a lot of them went to Le Pen, a lot abstained, and then some went to Macron. And then we had, like, small interesting ones where it's like Macron, and then some went to Le Pen, and then Le Pen, and some went to Macron. It was weird all around. It just shows that some weird, interesting debacles in regards to how people vote. But yeah, that's essentially it for the French election. Macron ended up winning, and it seems that the French left is mostly going to be focused around Mélenchon. Many people are even stating that Mélenchon might actually be poised to become the next prime minister. It's somewhat unlikely, but it's possible that he will probably be one of the biggest voting blocks in the chamber. So anyways, moving on from that far left guy, let's talk about another far left guy. Well, not really a far left guy, a far left country, Nicaragua. Nicaragua has actually done something interesting. They have voted to, well, I mean, I don't think they voted for this, but they chose to expel the representatives from the OAS from their country and are basically just saying, get out. Their foreign minister stating, we ratify our unwavering decision to leave the Organization of American States as expressed on November 19, 2021 by confirming our irrevocable denunciation and resignation before this calamitous, truculent, and lying dependency on the State Department of Yankee imperialism. Now, this is, it's both, I mean, on surface it's good, but it's also like, the fact that Nicaragua is the one country to do this is very interesting, and I'm curious on whether or not this will affect the rest of Latin America and how they view the OAS. I mean, they already view the OAS rather negatively, but I wonder how the actual system will play out for them. We'll have to wait and see on that. Speaking of things we have to wait and see in Latin America, we're going to be talking about AMLO. More AMLO news. AMLO, I said this, and it looks like it's true. AMLO is his next big decision is going to be reforming the Mexico's electoral system. I was right. Granted, he went through those nationalization things first, but he's decided that his next big thing will be changing how Mexico's electoral system will be. And the reason why is because he just submitted what he wants to do to the Chamber of Deputies. Basically, here's what he plans to do. Basically, he's going to change the National Electoral Institute and brand it into a new thing. He's going to get rid of it, replace it with something called the National Institute of Elections and Consultations, because he's going to be trying to put a lot of referendums on the ballot. He will make it so that the Chamber of Deputies will be lowered, and now instead of 500 seats, there will be 300 seats. And in the Senate, the current number of seats of 96 will be reduced to 45. He will eliminate plurinational candidates, and only uninominal candidates will remain. Basically what that means is, I think this basically means he's trying to get rid of proportional representation. I don't know if that's getting rid of proportional representation entirely, but I looked it up. Uninominal means single-member districts, or a winner-take-all district, so that's what it seems like. He also plans to, the reason why is because he says, that with that, people will be more focused on elections because they actually have to look up the candidates instead of they can just voting on the party line. He says that he will also make it so that the financing of political parties will be substantially cut, and much more emphasis will be made on reducing the cost of any electoral process so that, Mexico won't have to spend a lot of money on elections, because that's one of the reasons why the INE is claiming these referendums are bad, is because they're wasting money. He wants it so that the amount of money that they spend is not that much. And he also says that there will be better facilities and transparency in the participation of Mexicans living abroad, and those who are outside the country at the time of voting can vote electronically. So, basically, it is a mixed bag. Basically, that entire thing was a mixed bag. Some things, fine. Others, not so much. Reforming the electoral process to not be focused on a lot of spending, that's fine. But also, on that same notion, having it so that you would get rid of proportional representation is probably a bad idea. That's really why a lot of minor parties in Mexico have flourished. I'm pretty sure that's the only reason Morena has actually become a prominent political force, is because proportional representation helped them get off the ground. Like, I mean, honestly, I don't know what else to say. It's a mixed bag, and we'll have to wait and see if this is even a possibility. Now, speaking of possibilities, why don't we move on to some, like, electoral news? Well, not necessarily. Well, yes, electoral news. First, we're going to be talking about Kahele. Kahele, for those who don't know, he's the guy who replaced Tulsi Gabbard in the House of Representatives. Basically, I didn't trust the guy. He was, like, super friendly with Neera Tanden and was, like, attacking Tulsi from, like, a neoliberal-ish perspective, you know, like the Russian asset stuff. I wasn't really particularly fond of him. Well, it turns out I won't have to worry about him anymore because I was kind of proven right in a way about him. You see, Kahele, after just one term in the House of Representatives, has decided that he's going to become, like, run for governor of Hawaii instead, which many people have been noticing for a while, because Kahele, many people have been noticing, he's been voting by proxy a lot recently, and we now know why, because he's been spending all the time that he's been voting on proxy in staying in Hawaii. And he made some excuses like, oh, it's just so much of a trip to go from here and there and blah, blah, blah. But many people were saying, like, dude, that's why we elected you, to do this thing. But he's like, but now we know really the true reason why. He's planning to run for governor of Hawaii, which, believe it or not, is actually a common thing. A lot of members of the House of Representatives in Hawaii usually try to run for governor because they're relatively popular politicians in Hawaii. Yeah, that's pretty interesting. But one thing many people have been noticing is that this is the reason why I'm talking about it. Not only so I can say, like, haha, Kahele sucks, but also so I can say something interesting. This leaves open blue seats, and these are our favorite seats, my friends. And there's actually a progressive right smack dab in Hawaii that can perfectly run for the seat. Kenyella Ing. Kenyella Ing was actually the person that I tried to get to run for the seat in the last cycle when Tulsi decided that she was going to not seek the House seat, period. But he then ended up endorsing Kahele. Now that doesn't seem to be a problem. So, yeah, I think Kenyella Ing should run for the House of Representatives. Many people say, like, many people were worried that he couldn't run because he ran in the first House seat last time. But the thing is, in Hawaii, since the two districts are literally like, one district is like one small fraction of an island, and then the other district is the entire rest of Hawaii. They don't have that rule of, like, you have to live in the district to run in it. In fact, a lot of places actually don't have that rule. Like, many people say, like, oh, Reina Abdelhamid, she doesn't live in the district, but she's running in it, even though, like, because she lives, like, literally, like, a little bit outside of the district. I don't even think a lot of places actually do have that rule. It's just a formality that you have to do that. But either way, I think Kenyella Ing should be chosen for the seat. I mean, well, we should try to elect him in the seat. Kenyella Ing, run for the seat. Speaking of running, here's some interesting things about a North Carolina seat. In fact, it was a seat that I used to hold, but I do not anymore. Okay, so many people are noticing that there's some interesting things happening in the seat. You see, because North Carolina District 4, for those who don't know, used to be held by a guy by the name of David Price. He was one of the 3 Democrat members of the House of Representatives, like, for a long time. Now they have 5 members, and they're poised to possibly get 6 members, I think. Maybe just 5. I don't know how the redistricting has panned out for a lot of issues. But this seat is a prime target because, like, he has decided that he's going to drop out and, like, he's not going to run again. And many people are poised to run for the seat, including Clay Aiken, Nita Alam, who's, like, the progressive candidate who just got Bernie's endorsement, and another candidate by the name of Valerie Fushi. There's also one named Richard L. Watkins, who stole my money. Yeah, I still haven't gotten that money back, even though he said he was going to give me the money. Oh, well. Basically, there's another person who claims to be progressive named Ashley Ward running in the seat. I don't really care about her either. But essentially, here's what's happening. Many people are noticing that a lot of outside money has been pouring into this seat. And the reason why is because Nita Alam is very much poised to win the seat. But a lot of outside groups are basically trying to buy Fushi. That being because Alam is running, like, very well. Like, she's running a very interesting, like, she's running a decently big campaign. She's raised more money out of all of the people. And, like, again, she's very much poised to win the seat. And a lot of groups basically screwed themselves right into the seat to try and basically shift the tide to Fushi. First, Emily's List basically announced that they backed her, and then Congressional Black Caucus lent their support to her as well. AIPAC has disclosed that they're putting a ton of money into her seat, but one of the interesting things that many people have been pointing out about this was that Emily's List is making a very weird choice in this state. Because in this state, there is a candidate, like in North Carolina District 1, which is where one of the other members of the House of Representatives, who was a Democrat, is announcing retirement, G.K. Butterfield, that is going to have a contentious primary as well, against Erica Smith and Don Davis. Now, I'm not particularly a fan of Erica Smith, but here's the fact. Erica Smith and Don Davis are having a very contentious race, because it could, currently that seat is flippable, but it's unknown if it will be flippable. But the thing is, Don Davis is an anti-abortion Democrat. And for some reason, Emily's List is not even touching Erica Smith in that seat. But they're backing Fushi in this seat against Alam. And Emily's List is the group that poised itself to be a super pro-abortion group. What the heck? I don't get it. Why, of all of the races in North Carolina, do they choose to talk about this one? I'll tell you why. Because in this one, there could actually be a victory for progressives. And of course, even though that would be very beneficial to Emily's List, they don't like that. So yeah, that's pretty much a very interesting thing going on in North Carolina District 4. Hopefully Nita Alam has what she can do to win. Now the next story, the last story, is one that is also about North Carolina, and I didn't want to have to use this source, but it's the only source that's talking about it. It's from the Daily Mail, but the source seems to be somewhat legit. Okay, so there's no beating around the bush. It looks like we're getting another one of those super far-right members of the House of Representatives coming out as gay. Because Madison Cawthorn has been getting into a lot of trouble recently, because turns out that his scheduler and him have been having some very interesting things. You see, I don't know if it started with this, but one of the most prominent things that happened was there was a video that Midas Touch, a somewhat progressive-ish organization, leaked, that showed his scheduler, Stephen Smith, who he was talking to, and then here's how weird the conversation was. The conversation, the footage that shows the conversation, immediately just cuts to Cawthorn saying, "I feel the passion and desire and would like to see a naked body beneath my hands." And then Smith turns the camera to himself and says, "Me too." And then he turns the camera back to Cawthorn, but focused on his legs, and then he starts rubbing his, inner thigh. But that's not all. Apparently, this coincides with some probes into Madison Cawthorn, where it's revealed that he's been giving Stephen Smith thousands of dollars in gifts, mostly through Venmo. Now, the thing about these, services like Venmo is that when you give the people money, it actually lets you describe what you're doing, why you're giving the money. So, it might be "Oh, man, dang it, I don't have any money for this, soda." And then your friend's "Don't worry, you can Venmo me later." And then they pay for the soda for you. And then you Venmo them $1. And then it's "Hey, this is for the soda." Well, here is the names of the things that him and Cawthorn were sending each other through the Venmos. Okay, so on June 17th, 2018, Madison Cawthorn paid Stephen Smith for, quote, "getting naked for me in Sweden." On June 21st, 2018, Madison paid Stephen again, quote, "for the stuff we did in Amsterdam." Madison Cawthorn paid Stephen Smith on June 22nd, 2018, quote, "the quickie in the airport." Stephen Smith paid Madison Cawthorn on June 25th, 2018, quote, "for loving me daily and nightly." I mean, the dude is clearly having an affair with a staffer. Now, if I remember correctly, one of the reasons, like, Madison Cawthorn has been trying to defend this, like, saying, like, oh, no, those are just jokey names. Those are just jokes, funny joke, haha names that we were giving each other. Like, that's a funny joke. It's like, oh, buddy, I hate to break it to you, but this isn't a new thing. You're like the 15th person who's done this. Be an extremely far-right anti-gay politician and then be caught sucking D in the bathroom, man. Like, this isn't new for you. You're just mad that they're catching up to you next. And many people have been also making a joke saying, like, well, I mean, half joke, I would assume, because they're saying, like, this only started happening when Madison Cawthorn was talking about the coke orgies, and it's like, yeah, like, I mean, basically what I'm saying, what most people are saying is that Madison Cawthorn crossed a line that he wasn't not allowed to cross, and now he seems to be getting in a lot of trouble. This is also added up with the fact that a lot of people have been endorsing against him in the upcoming election. So clearly, I think we're going to be seeing the last of Madison Cawthorn, at least for now. We'll see where that goes. Speaking of going, why don't we go on to the main topic of this video? Before we begin, I'd like to say, hey Vaush, how you doing? How you doing, bro? If you're watching this and reacting to this, great. Can you do me a quick favor, though? Can you, like, use the chapters that I provide and then go into the shout-out page and just let that part play? At least shout out the people who are in the shout-out yourself. I'm pretty sure the person in that, like, little section would greatly appreciate it. Or not, I guess you don't have to. But I would greatly appreciate it if you did. Now that we got that out of the way, let's talk a little bit about the man, the myth, the legend himself, Vaush, also known to normal people as Ian Koczynski. Born on Valentine's Day 1994, I'm sure that didn't affect anything that his parents were going to do that night. For those who have no clue who Vaush is, I do not grasp how you exist. I really don't get it. Well, I mean, I guess to be fair, I probably have some... No, even if you were a conservative in my audience, you'd probably know who Vaush is. But for those who really don't know who he is for some reason, Vaush is a very popular political streamer who is a libertarian socialist / market socialist, anarcho-Bidenist or anarcho-NATOist or whatever you want to call him, who basically kind of kickstarted the debate bro trend. Well, I say kind of because that's technically more attributed to the person he ripped off, Destiny. For those who know who Destiny is, basically Vaush is Destiny, but an explicitly left-wing version of Destiny. He technically started his career using the name Irish Laddie, basically using that to top into Destiny streams and, like, chat with some people there, and then eventually managed to get on the Destiny chats and was like, hey, it's me, Irish Laddie. And then he had, like, this weird relationship with Destiny where basically he was the resident leftist, I guess. It's especially weird in retrospect, given all the drama that's been happening between those two, where it's like, you look back at the old videos and it's like, me and my best buddy, Irish Laddie, and it's like, okay. And he basically just kept being on, like, the Destiny show for a while, until eventually he started to be like, all these people who like me, I can actually just start my own career. And then something happened really early on in his career to basically make it so that he would not be, like, okay using the term Irish Laddie anymore. If you know, I'm of course talking about the sexual harassment allegations against him. So then he basically decided, this Irish Laddie thing, the name's tainted and I kind of wanted to get rid of it anyways. I know, I'll call myself Vaush. And I guess that's how he became Vaush. Funny fact is that I didn't know this until, like, much later. It's like, wait, technically I started my YouTube career before Vaush did. And it's like, Now, I know you probably might say, but didn't he appear on the Destiny show before he started his mainstream YouTube channel? Well, yeah, but I started my YouTube channel, not this one, but a different one, long before that. So technically, I still reign supreme over Vaush. I'm pretty sure the normies in my audience probably went like, wait, hold on, why'd you just skip over the sexual harassment allegations? Don't worry, we'll get back to them. But first, let's talk a little bit about Vaush's content. Vaush, as I said, is a streamer. He streams. That's what he does. He presses a button on his computer and then talks into it for, like, a long time with no cuts. He'll do all sorts of things. Play video games, debate people, react to some random like YouTube video. Basically, I don't know if this was an intended thing for him to do, but I guess essentially what he was doing was trying to infiltrate the gamer bro sphere, which was populated by a lot of right-wing people, and basically try to insert leftism into that, which has some mixed reactions. Are you turning the gamer bros further to the left, or are you just making the people who are on the left more like gamer bros? The answer to both questions is so. We of course can't talk about Vaush without going into his main content that he's known for, the debate bro. Vaush is well known for debating people on the internet because that's what Destiny did. And he's like, I have to be a leftist version of Destiny, ergo, I have to debate people too. He's debated quite a few people from the right, left, everywhere else. He's debated Sargon, Stefan Molyneux, Adam Kokesh, Caleb Maupin, Hunter Avallone, Larry Sharp, Charlie Kirk, Tim Pool, and even his daddy, Destiny himself. He'll also have like semi-debates where it's like, I think the intention is to just have a discussion, but then they essentially just turn into debates, like what happened with Professor Flowers and what happened with Non-Compete, I think? I don't remember if they were like scheduled to be debates, but I do know they eventually just became debates. And one of the big things that Vaush does to make himself a bit unique than other leftist debates, and basically how he changed the online debate discourse, well, I don't know if he changed it, I think that was basically just how online debate was, it's that he basically goes full-on edgelord. Like, he's not afraid of, like, trying to be, like, of the nice discourse. He will point-blank be mean and yell at you right there, like, and then he'll, like, interrupt you and be like, no, wait, hold on. Like, he does not really have time for BS. Or if you're a Vaush hater, you might think he has plenty of time for BS. He'll challenge your points, he'll try to do some sort of, like, a rhetorical nonsense or whatever to try and get you to understand him. He's not afraid of doing things that you would not expect him to do. And surprise, surprise, this does not rub everybody the right way. Some people on the left do not necessarily like what he does. They think that it might be teetering on the edge of like having some sort of like actual meaning versus just being edgy for the sake of edgy's sake. And I think one of the biggest examples of this is probably an infamous one that many people might know on the top of their head. Something known as the tactical N-word. Basically, in order to debate further right people, he'll drop the N-bomb. Because it's like, you wouldn't expect someone on the left to say the N-word. So, he says it so that he doesn't come off as like one of those like, oh, boo-hoo, you say the N-word, run away, cry. Like, he doesn't come off as that type of lefty, the stereotype of leftist. And he basically says that's kind of his point. That's what he's trying to do. He's the mean, edgy, like, oh, I hate everything he smashes everything in the room. Probably poor choice of words. But he does that so that he can basically spread the idea of like, oh, not everybody on the left is like this, I gotta run away and hide in my safe space type person. He doesn't believe in that. Vaush is like, no, I don't like that. And he argues this type of approach would probably be beneficial for the left in the long term. Be open to being on people's shows to debate them. Be open to be outside of your echo chambers. Now, again, some people view it as a net positive. They understand what Vaush is saying. Some people argue, again, edgy for edgy's sake. Now, personally, I don't really care if either or is true. In fact, there's some people who probably argue, and I think he technically already said this, that it's essentially just a weather vane so that he gets all the attention. Which, again, can be positive or negative, depending on your interpretation. Like, for example, not everybody on the left is on his level of debating. Ergo, it probably would make sense to have those kinds of people run the discourse, whereas Vaush can represent them in a debate sort of format. Vaush's extreme superfans would argue that this is like some sort of super mega ultra super important type of debate tactic, and that this is truly going to save the left. But the Vaush derangement syndromers will say that this is a big negative thing for the left, and it interprets them in an extremely bad light, and it hurts other people. But I'm of the belief of like, like, I mean, I'm the only person that seems to have the belief of, like, every creator is good at certain things. If you're good at making, like, video essays and, like, you're explaining your points in that way, that's your thing. But if you're good at doing it in a debate-style format, then that's also your thing. Man, I think I spent a lot of that time talking about the Vaush content and not even really moving on from debates. Because it's essentially what Vaush is known for. But in fact, ironically, even though that's what Vaush is known for, I didn't even watch debates at first. I just saw him do, like, reactions to, like, some random YouTubers. Like, I don't know. I don't even remember what my first Vaush video was. It was like, he was reacting to something. I know that for a fact. It was, like, somebody else's video. It was like a prominent conservative thinker, I think, or it was like a Vox video, or I think it was like one of the incel videos. I don't remember which one, but it was like he was reacting to a video and giving his analysis that way in a similar format, but, you know, not with the person being able to talk to him back. Ironically, I think the content that is probably the least enjoyable of Vaush is his gameplay, because it's like, who cares? Like, really, the only gameplay content are the ones that where he says something like very oopsie, or where he's debating a very prominent creator. Now, a creator like Vaush has a fair bit of controversies. I mentioned one previously, the one where he sexually harassed someone very early on into his, like, career. But before that, I want to get into some of the other controversies that honestly probably aren't that well, like, big. The first one is, of course, his infamous tactical N-bomb. Basically, like, I mean, I explained it very early on, and that's pretty much all you need to hear about it. He basically said, like, it's okay to use the N-word in certain circumstances, and he's just since been like, yeah, that's probably stupid, and I probably won't do that again. But in my opinion, it's like saying the N-word, especially when you're trying to do it in a positive manner, is not necessarily big cancelable worthy. There was the controversy surrounding him and his Professor Flowers debacle, where he argued that she was essentially, like, somewhat, like, fascistic, or, like, her points were very similar to white supremacist talking points, and a lot of people got mad because they're like, why are you comparing a black woman to a Nazi? Now, here's the thing, he's technically kind of right, because if you listen to the Professor Flowers debate, she literally says, like, she essentially says at one point, I don't know if it's like an exact quote, but at one point Vaush literally says, like, if black people choose to commit, like, a genocide against white people, is that okay? She said that she personally wouldn't believe that it's okay, but in that circumstance, she wouldn't oppose it, or something like that. Like, said something that was very much like, sort of like revenge of, I forget what the term is, the revenge of the, I don't know. You know, the term is like where indigenous people or oppressed people then turn around and then do what the oppressors did to them. Basically like, oh, if Native Americans got back control of the country, whites would be put into reservations. Then in the fallout of that, Vaush got into a debate with another libertarian socialist creator called Non-Compete. Basically, at one point again, due to the Professor Flowers incident, they were going back to the Nazi comparison. And basically, one of the reasons why Non-Compete was saying that the Nazis were bad was because Jews didn't control the banks. And then Vaush stated that there was a disproportionate amount of Jewish control of banks in Germany during the Weimar Republic. Non-Compete then basically says, okay, Vaush, we're done here, bye, and then he leaves. On the surface, that does sound pretty yikesy, but as Vaush then explains, like, that's the point is that is technically true, but rather than going through the explanations as to why that's true and how that occurred even to begin with, and the ins and outs of that, and how that doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things, Non-Compete is hedging all of his bets on just the entirety of the thing not being true, when in fact, it's the aspects of it that weren't true that were the problem. Because I think literally, like, afterwards, there were people who were Vaush stands that were basically showing, like, articles, literally showing, like, that was technically true. Yes, it was true that a majority of the people who were in charge of banks in the Weimar Republic were Jewish. But the thing is, it's like, why is that the case? And the case is because Jewish people were forced into those jobs due to the fact that back in the olden times, Christians were not allowed to do usury. Basically, they were not allowed to loan money and to anybody that was against the Bible. However, the Torah says that that was allowed and that Jewish people could do that. And since the Jewish people were being pushed out of every single other occupation because people would rather hire a Christian and didn't want to hire Jewish people because of anti-Semitism that was already around at the time period, they were forced into taking the jobs of bankers because it was the only job they could get. And then that was then used to justify more anti-Semitism, because then people who don't know that piece of information will then can just easily buy into other reasons as to why that is. Like, for example, the Protocols of Elder Design are like, oh, they're doing this so they can take over the world's finances and blah, blah, blah. And then that's like a global evil domination plan. That part's not true, and it's very obviously not true. A comparison that he made would be as if non-compete argued against 1350. For those who don't know, 1350 is in reference to the fact that 13% of America's population is African American. And despite that, they make up 50% of the crime. Now, you could just sit there and argue that's not true, but that is an objective fact. That is true. Much like how you could say, oh, Jews didn't control the banks, but that was true. It's like, I mean, that's just an objective fact. The part where it gets conspiratorial and crazy is the why as to that. Like, Nazis would argue that the why for the Jews running the banks is so that they can do some global domination plan, and the why for a lot of people is like, for the African American one, is they're predisposed to crime, or that they believe that, oh, family, like they need to bring back the African American family or welfare or whatever the heck. Ignoring the fact that since the United States has heavily militarized their police force, they, of course, are like tougher on African Americans due to the fact that they'll be more focused on petty crimes, which will then cause African American fathers to be taken away into custody for minor drug offenses and other sort of stuff. And then that, of course, leads to African American boys not having a father figure, which could possibly put them down the path, especially considering the fact that they are already low on the socioeconomic ladder due to the fact that the United States is systemically racist. They would choose to ignore that part just for their easy answer. But the problem is, you can't get into that by simply just stating, no, 1350 is not real. And that was the overall point he was making. Or the point where he started like getting really, really mean to J.K. Rowling, and then many people were calling him a misogynist. And many trans creators got mad at Vaush for basically being like, yo, you're kind of leading into the stereotype of J.K. Rowling trying to say like, oh, all the people who are hating me are misogynists and they hate women. And then that led to him like cutting ties with, well, he didn't cut ties. People cut ties with him, Cat Black, and Contra. That one's more of a mixed bag, and the ones before this one were a bit like a lean more on Vaush. But let's talk about the ones that would probably make you a bit more suspicious of Vaush. First, we're going to be talking about the controversy that I mentioned very early on, the sexual harassment allegations. For those who have no clue what this is, very early on in Vaush's career, as I said, like basically right before the Vaush universe became a thing, he got into conversations with another person in the Destiny Discord server. Now, him and this person have autism. Now, for those who are of the internet world, I'm not saying this as a like making them like negative to them. They both have autism. Like, actually, I can't necessarily define autism or like autism spectrum disorder or anything of the sort, because like honestly, it's very, even now things are basically being shifted in the definition of it. But basically, one of the biggest sums up that most people generally agree on is that people with autism do not necessarily grasp social cues as well as quote unquote normal people. To those with autism, I'm not saying this again to negatively harm you in any sort of way. I'm just saying that's the generally accepted definition that most people see. And the way we treat it has changed very drastically to the point where basically anybody who is shy or has some trouble like a socializing is basically considered autistic to most people. Like, I mean, I'll be frank. I mean, there were a lot of people who said that I had autism, and when I looked up, like, what are the symptoms of autism, I was like, huh. And I remember when I would actually tell people, like, I mean, because everybody knows what autism is, But then when I actually explained to them what autism actually is, like, what is the actual, like, things in, like, what is the symptoms of autism, they're like, wait, that's it? Basically, the one thing that is very quintessential to this story, it seems, is the not picking up of certain social cues. Because Vaush and this person became friendly, and then they started chatting, and Vaush was getting a bit flirtatious with this person. And this flirtation, the girl in this situation had tried to quell Vaush's libido, basically saying, like, tried to be politely be like, no thanks, I'm not quite interested, but thank you for the honor. Thank you for the honor. That's stupid. She didn't say that. I just said that for some reason. Basically, she was trying to let him down easy, but Vaush wasn't quite letting up. He kept basically thinking that she was sending him signals, and that he kept basically coming on to her, to the point where he basically started sending some, like, NSFW material. To my knowledge, she was 18 and he was in his, like, mid to early 20s. So it's definitely not, like, one of those kinds of, like, reveals of talking with someone in an NSFW manner. But basically, they eventually came forward and said, like, yeah, Vaush basically sexually harassed me, and then basically leaked all of the, like, interactions that her and him had. And then Vaush basically got a bit mad, and then, you know, as you do, he got defensive. But then I think eventually I don't know if he eventually did say, like, remorse for his actions, but he did basically say that in his defense, he didn't understand the social cues. He misunderstood yellows as greens. Like if she was holding up a red stop sign, but he read it as a green or a yellow. Basically that kind of stuff. But those ones seem to pale in comparison to the massive horsecock in the room. The accusations that Ian Vaush Kuczynski is a pedophile. This is something that has basically chased him throughout his entire online career, to the point where I have to dedicate an entire section of this video, and it will be a pretty long section. If I'm correct, I would assume that this will be a very long section in this video. I literally wrote down notes so that all the stuff that I say cannot be misconstrued in some sort of fashion, because this controversy is pretty big, and I may have to drop some pretty big hot takes for all of those who are both Vaush stans and Vaush derangement syndromers. Pretty big things. But that out of the way, let's just get right into it. Here are the accusations. The accusations is that Ian Vaush Kuczynski is a pedophile of some sort. The reasons being is he made some comments that were very controversial due to his edgelord style nature. The most famous clip that you all may be familiar with was when he compared owning CP to owning an iPhone, basically arguing that both are made by exploiting children, and that you cannot claim some sort of moral high ground owning one over the other. However, the words he used definitely did not seem like words that were trying to establish that point, saying that he had not heard a single moral argument as to why owning the former was illegal, especially considering the lead up to it. You see, the lead up to that part was where he was talking about how drawn images of animals doing the deed and doing the deed with animals would be okay as long as it's not abusive. Because, as he states, humans do not care about the consent of animals otherwise. Cenk Uygur made some similar things. Basically, what I'm trying to understand is that I believe what they're arguing is that the animal can do them, but they cannot do the animal, because them doing the animal would cause harm. That is definitely a thing that I do not argue for, but that's the most famous one There are some other ones. He made there was a clip of him supposedly arguing that children and adults could have relationships and have a happy, fun time with no long-lasting effects. And that part is clipped and shared around because like, see, Vaush is arguing that children and adults can't have relations. But that clip in particular is actually taken out of context. He's saying that technically that is possible, but it is not the majority consensus. In our society, it's more likely that the other options will happen because of many other various issues. Like, for example, a boy can have sex with his, like, hot science teacher and face no problems in his life. But then there are other people who, given that exact same circumstances, will be emotionally scarred for the rest of their life. Some of Vaush's prawn tastes definitely also do not necessarily help him in this circumstance, because he's stated that he's on the record as saying that he has jerked it to Lolicon and aged up art of teen characters like Connie from Steven Universe and Star Butterfly from Star vs. The Forces of Evil. For those people who go outside, the term Lolicon, or Loli, or you might know it as Lolly, is art showing girls who are drawn, quote, young looking, or just plain young, doing lewd things. I should mention it's anime, for those who don't know. And while I'm at it, I should also define this term. Shotacon is basically that, but with little boys. But not just that, Vaush also has some very sus Discord messages. One person in a Discord was talking about how when they were a minor, they had sex with an adult, and then Vaush stated that that was, quote, unironically hot. And then there was another one where people were talking about the age of consent in his hypothetical socialist paradise. And he argued that since in his society, like a society that would be under his political ideology, all of the power imbalances between adult and child would be essentially gone. So he argued that the age of consent in his ideal society would be lowered. I should have prefaced all this with, this was very early on in his online career. Ever since, I think at least 2020, not 2020, maybe 2020, 2021, I think, he's basically started going back on a lot of his positions. And the most prominently, he's been coming out against anime for all this like weird like teen type stuff. And point blank saying that the age of consent should be raised. And he even debated a guy who was a literal pedophile named Mr. Girl. And the conversation between the two was just so... it just got so gross so fast that Vaush was just like, no. And he just left. Now, this has, of course, caused some more controversy. Again, basically on the lines of whether or not you like or hate Vaush. Those who like Vaush basically say that what he's doing is just trying to cover his tracks because he realizes that those kinds of positions are not good. But the Vaush lovers say that every single thing that has been used against Vaush is taken out of context. Vaush is in the right. All they're doing is trying to smear Vaush and blah, blah, blah. And this is where I'm going to probably make both of these sides mad. Or maybe not. Maybe one of these sides might like my position more than the other side. And it's probably not even the side that technically I should be on. If you'll indulge me, let me explain what I think really happened. Now let's start with Vaush. Vaush, no offense, doesn't really strike me as a person who was a normal kid in school. He's pan, neurodivergent, and according to his wikis, he was already a pretty far left person. The one picture of him that is like somewhat really young is like him as during an emo phase. So I'm probably making a lot of assumptions about him. The one assumption that I know I'm not making is the fact that he spent a lot of his time online, and I would argue probably a lot when he was growing up and developing himself sexually. Now here's the thing. If you're a person growing up, the internet is the last place that you should be looking for like discovering yourself, because the internet is fucked up. Especially in the most developmental ages that will probably be very important to him, late high school, early college. That is a very confusing time in a person's sexual life, because you're leaving your teenage years and becoming an adult. So you basically have to do a sliding scale in regards to who you're attracted to. For example, you're 17, you can date someone who's 16, 15, maybe 14, but 13 is way too much. Then, next year, you turn 18, all of a sudden, you can't date that 14-year-old anymore. That 15-year-old is probably also a bit off of your limits. Now, a majority of people can adapt to this, especially since during that time period, a lot of these people have probably already started looking up internet porn or porn in like magazines, so they're already probably attracted to people who are like generally in their 20s. Unfortunately, there are some people who cannot do that, and will keep that sort of mindset into adulthood. It is sadly an incredibly common thing. You'll get college-age guys dating high schoolers, and at a lesser level, you'll get people who are literally like about to leave high school and go into college, dating people who just entered high school from middle school. These people will eventually get older, but sadly, those kinds of attractions will stay, and since they don't want to be called a pedophile or something of the line, they will do everything they can to try and make sure that they can justify it in any manner. You know, they'll create fake sexualities like maps, or if they want to get in even less trouble, i.e. not go to prison, they will turn to drawing stuff that suits those needs. One of the most prominent porn artists was a person who was just like this. A person by the name of Shadman. A person who everybody on the internet loved. Shadman was one of the most popular artists on the internet because he was this huge edgelord behavior and did that. He drew lowly and Shota stuff all the time. He's the one who essentially popularized a lot of things on the internet. He popularized sort of like trap, femboy, trans type stuff. But he also popularized the phrase, "it's just a drawing," when referring to the art that he drew of lolly and Shota characters. He would literally draw stuff like Hillary Clinton. And it wasn't until he started getting some like people being like, "Yo, what?" that he started like adding like the addendum of like, "Oh, it's okay, they're over 18. It doesn't matter if they look like actual children. They're 18. And the internet, like, literally fell hook, line, and sinker for that. Look at me, one of the most popular websites for Rule 34, Rule34.xxx, was literally started for people to get porn of Lisa Simpson. The internet is literally just, like, full of, like, this kind of degeneracy. There are comics of Tails meeting with baby characters, and I can't even talk more about it because it's, like, the same thing goes for, like, animals. Like, I mean, I'm not even talking about, like, furry stuff, but I'm talking about, like, there's a specific subsection of furry stuff called feral stuff, where I didn't even know that was the name. The name I originally called it was, like, you literally just drew two dogs having sex. It's, like, they argue, like, no, it's a drawing, so it's okay. It's, like, how could you say this? There's apparently a popular art category where you get girls and they get horses, and I'm pretty sure that's where Vaush got his thing. And this kind of sentiment, it didn't go away. This is stuff that still continues to this day. There are artists that will literally draw a character who is canonically 10, and they draw them in no other way to indicate that they are any older. Now, for example, typically with aged up stuff, they'll draw like a female character with bigger breasts or like a bigger ass or like longer hair, or they're taller. They do nothing of the sort. They draw them exactly how they look, give no indication, but then the second somebody calls it out, people are going to go, "It's just a drawing, dude. What's the problem?" This is how bad it's gotten. When I was at a poli-sci course when I was 18, the teacher literally talked about this. He talked about how technically it was an illegal gray area. That's literally how big that this discourse somehow got. Now, here's the thing. How does all that stuff that I just rambled about tie back to Vaush? Well, basically, during that time period where all that stuff was going down, Vaush would have been in his late teens, early 20s, when all this stuff essentially goes down. Maybe this kind of stuff began when Vaush was in his early teens, I don't know. But basically, there is a good portion of his life where this kind of stuff is essentially in the discourse. My guess is maybe due to Vaush's own mentality and how he was easily able to be drawn into this kind of stuff. And then, as he got older, he started realizing, Yikes. Maybe I should not be in this sphere anymore, and has now seen the error of his ways. And maybe the last lingering elements of that kind of mentality tagged in very early on in his YouTube career. It's very similar to like those like people who have like that Nazi phase growing up, where like they were drawn into the alt-right, and then soon as they get older, they start breaking away. Now here's the thing. How can I know that this is what happened to Vaush? Well, you know how I keep mentioning the fact that in this time period, Vaush would have been in his like late teens, early 20s, that kind of age range? At that same time, I would have been around my early teen years to like mid-teen years, like 14 to 17, that kind of stuff. And unfortunately, since I was a vastly younger age, I was more easily susceptible to these kinds of arguments. And I was a fan of some people called the Sleepycast, who introduced me to this Shadman person. And being a mid-teenage person, when I eventually went to the Shadman website, as teenagers do with that kind of content, and that's basically, I hate to be the... That's basically where I discovered I was bi because of all the femboy stuff he posted. I didn't know it at the time, but essentially that's where it came from. Or at least that's what helped me get a bit more comfortable with it, I guess. But then because then eventually I got older, I started realizing, wait, this is way more sus than I thought. It didn't help by the fact that at that time, Shadman actually started drawing, actual people. And that was basically yikes, I gotta bounce. And now looking back, it's why the heck did I ever get obsessed with this person? And hopefully those people that I hung out with also met a similar conclusion. Although I'm not sure that they did. And other artists started basically being okay, you're definitely starting to toe a line that definitely is not in your favor. Because it's if you draw that kind of stuff about a character you were obsessed with when you were that age, that's one thing. But then now you're doing it to a character that you just started watching. Okay, that's definitely very bad. So to restate my positions so that everybody is very abundantly clear, pedophilia is wrong. Maps, not a sexuality, they should be in prison. Lowly and Shona, suspect and wrong. Aged up, gray area. Age play, I didn't talk about age play at all, but just to reference, age play is sus, but a gray area. Where does Shadman belong? In prison. Did Vaush say some very sus stuff early on in his career? Yes. Did Vaush have sex with kids? No. Has Vaush matured and changed his mind on a lot of the earlier sus stuff he said? Seemingly. Is Vaush a pedophile? I would say no. Now keep that in mind. If tomorrow it was revealed that Vaush was having some saucy DMs with a 16-year-old boy, I'll be the first to say something. But as of now, it appears that is not the case. So to all you Vaush stans, sadly, not everything was taken out of context. And to all you Vaush derangement syndromers, I don't think he's a pedo. And I probably should have prefaced this whole episode with saying that I am a Vaush fan. But I am a Vaush fan, not a Vaush stan. Again, if Vaush does something that I do believe is very sus and very bad, too sus to have some sort of moral gray area or anything of the sort, I'll say something. Do I believe Vaush is some sort of harbinger of great leftist discourse or whatever the heck? I don't think so. Is Vaush a person who provides good content? Yeah. Can he have some critiques? Yeah, of course, duh. Everybody can. If Vaush watches this video, I hope he at the very least saw the whole thing. Essentially all I have to say, Vaush good. Thanks for watching this video. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and click that bell so you don't find a future video when it comes out. And if you're interested in more content from me, you can go to my website, follow me on Twitter, join my Discord, check out my articles on the Independent Political Report, or consider supporting me on Patreon.